Hello, hello, hello. In today's video, I'm going to discuss something that is one of those little tricky things and really varies widely. But hopefully this video will give you some guidance on how to look at each of your scenes in your story. So the question is, how much detail is enough? How much description is enough? How do I know if I'm inserting too much? How do I know if I need more? I'm going to venture out on a limb and say most of the time the issue is that you need more. You haven't inserted enough description, but sometimes there is too much. I have seen this with my very own eyes, and I'll flag it as an editor like, okay, this doesn't feel relevant, which brings me to the measuring stick. How do you know if it's enough or too much? Two things, relevancy and change. So let's talk about each of these. What I mean by relevancy, the question here you want to ask yourself, and you want to look at this on a scene-by-scene basis, is what do the readers really need to know in order to understand what's going on in the scene and really feel like they're in the action? Think of what you're trying to tell them within the scene. What's the point? What's the point of the scene? What's the mood of the scene? What did you take away from this experience? Was it a heavy, very emotional moment? Was it sort of just like, okay, one of those scenes that probably is not going to be the most memorable in your book? There's going to be an answer to this. You have to make the judgment call. Are you describing a pivotal moment in your life? Are you describing the saddest point you've ever felt? Are you jumping with joy in this scene? Those are the questions that will help you understand what your readers need to know. So let's take this back a moment. If I am describing a very sad scene, might I want to include that the sun was out blazing and the birds were chirping? Probably not. That doesn't help set the mood. That's not the description that we need. We need some relevant details. What helps us feel that sadness? You may end up just not describing much at all about the environment that you're in, but you may describe the moment that you feel this crushing blow, how your body reacts to this sadness. Maybe you get this phone call and it's giving you this sad news. Internally is where we're going to feel that sadness. Does it matter if you're sitting on like a red couch or a green couch or whatever? No. Does it matter that it's raining? Maybe that could help sink in the sadness a little bit. Maybe it's downpouring and you're just standing there in the rain in shock. That could help. Is it sprinkling? Is it raining hard? Is it snowing? The quality of that weather moment, the weather in that moment, might help drive home the particular feelings that you are trying to portray. So what is relevant? Here's another way to look at relevancy. If you are in a place that gives you some type of feeling, for example, I just am like a huge fan of my bedroom. After my ex-husband left, I decided this was going to be my room and I was going to do all the things and put pretty pillows on my bed, right? So I enjoy this room. It's my space, my moment. There is a certain feeling I get when I have time in my room by myself, when I'm in there just sort of enjoying my space, enjoying this little sanctuary I built for myself. I have a particular feeling when I'm in that room, regardless of what's maybe happening in my life. So the description of the room is going to be much more relevant in a scene where I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so mad at my kids and I just had to go take a time out. And so I went into my room and all of a sudden I'm calm. Well, what about my room makes me calm? Or what about that scene makes my room relevant? Maybe I'm trying to describe to you this is my little mommy secret. I go on timeout and I'll holler at my kids Mom's going on timeout and if you come bug me, you're grounded, What about this room helps me? What about this room makes me feel certain things. So you're going to want to know what's in the room. What does it look like? Is it bright? Is it, dark? Is it, those things are going to be relevant to that scene. If I'm describing a fight that I have with someone and they pick up something and throw it, we're going to want to know what they picked up. We're going to want to know some details about it. We're going to want to know maybe if it has a history, if it's sentimental, or did it make a big crash on the wall? Did it almost, nail you in the forehead or whatever? We want to know about that item. We may not need to know much more about the room, right? But you could be describing, like, are you in a small space? Are you in a big space? What makes the tension in this moment more? So that readers are sort of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. What if you were fighting in like a closet or whatever, like a walk-in closet, and you're cornered with nowhere to run? You'd want to describe like the almost the claustrophobic feeling of being in this tiny little space cornered by someone who's freaking you out. That's going to give us a different feeling than if you're in a kitchen, a big spacey kitchen, and this person's coming at you and you're arguing. You don't feel like you have no escape. What if you're, you're outdoors and it's cold or hot, and that affects the moment, that affects the scene happenings, right? That what's actually happening. If, maybe you faint because it's too hot. Well, you need to describe the weather instead of just saying too hot. Here's what we don't need in a moment like that. We don't need to know how many inches of rain fell the night before, or even in that moment, if it's a rainy day. We don't necessarily need to know it was 8 inches, but you could use that to describe the amount of rain if that fact is relevant. So you just have to know really what's relevant, what's important to that scene, what's important to your readers, what you want them to know. So the second thing is change. This really means you're going to ask yourself within that scene, how do things around you change to help us see the movement in your story? So this could allude to some time passing. This could allude to, maybe there was a shift in mood or a shift in something going on. There's some change to the room, your house, the weather, dark, light to dark, nighttime to daytime, right? We want to know. All of a sudden you feel the blinding sun on your face and you realize it's morning, instead of just saying like, I got out of bed, or I, just rolled out of bed. You didn't realize it was morning. Maybe that's not relevant, but the point is, there might be items or things that are changing in the world around you that show us something that we need to understand. Typically change, like I said, implies a passing of time. So the description would want to help us understand how that time passed. And remember, every scene needs to move your argument forward. So if there's no change in the description, we're not going to understand how it's moving. If you are just like going on and on and on and not describing where you are, but really you are moving from room to room, house to house, building to building, camp to camp, whatever. Like if you're outside, if you are moving locations, that's probably relevant. That helps us understand how fast or slow your story is moving, as far as like, are you skipping days? Are you skipping weeks? When you use description that tells us that sunset or sun rose, then we understand it's the next day or it's later that day. Without saying it's later that day, you could say the sun was low in the sky. Is that relevant to the scene other than just helping us understand that time passed? Not necessarily. It could be, but probably not. So you just want to make sure that you are very clear on helping your readers see where your story is and how it's changing and how it's moving. So the moral of the story here is you need to choose your details carefully. I would suggest that you try to put in, even if it feels weird, but you try to put in too much to start with. And then you go back and you ask some of these questions. Is this relevant? Does this help my reader see what might have changed that's important to the scene or the pacing or the timing of the story. They only need so much detail, and some scenes will not have much detail at all. Maybe it's a short scene or it's really dialogue heavy, but there's not a lot of action. You're on the phone, you're just sitting there, whatever. But some scenes will be much more detailed. You want to be able to paint a visual picture with your words and describe that scene. But again, relevancy and change. Is it relevant? Does it help illustrate the change that's happening in my story, the movement, the change? So those are the two questions you need to ask, of course, with some sub-questions in there. But err on the side of too much. You can always cut later. It's harder to go back and add more description if you're in the revision process, because once you're in the mindset and you're writing down your scene, you're most likely able to kind of visualize the scene in order to get it down on the page. You're most likely able to, you're putting yourself back in that moment. So, closing your eyes and just leaning in and just saying, like, what do I see? What is relevant in this scene? What does the reader need to know? Or how do I, visually see the descriptions that I need to put in my story here? Sometimes it's easier to get into that moment and just be in that moment and write it and write the scene and then go back and like mess with it later. You don't want to have to like go back into the scene to get some description extracted. Sometimes you will have to do that. Maybe most times you will have to do that. That's okay. But my advice moving forward, if you have not finalized your first draft, is just to write as much detail as possible, and you can always cut it later. So hopefully this helped calibrate that issue a little bit. Err on the side of too much. It's probably going to feel unnatural, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. You can always go back and edit it out, and just build us a world, build us a scene, build us some moments. We want to see these things in our minds. And that's your responsibility as a writer, to help readers use your words as paintbrushes to paint these scenes and paint these pictures. So I will see you in the next video to answer another commonly asked question.